So what's up everybody, this is Junior from Sandjack Knives. This video is going to be a little different than any of the other ones that have been on my channel up to this point. It's because we're going to be going a little bit different direction. We're not going to just be doing knife making videos anymore. I've been wanting for several years to do a complete series on knife sharpening, blade sharpening, because that's kind of the thing that got me into knife making to begin with. For those of you that kind of know my story, I watched the movie Rambo First Blood when I was a kid. And I was just fascinated when that deputy sheriff took his Rambo's knife and cut through that piece of paper really easily. The guy goes out into the woods with nothing but his survival knife, and he makes shelter. He makes fire with it. He sews himself up when he stitches himself. He makes tools. He harvests an animal. He cleans an animal. I mean, to eat. So I was just blown away from as a kid watching that and how useful the knife was. But it all started with learning how to sharpen and being passionate about it. So this video is going to go in a little bit different direction. We're going to be focusing on one of my newest passions, which is axes and hatchets. So last year on my birthday, my father gave me a brand new Grand Force Brook. This is a small woodland axe. If you've never heard of this company, I challenge you to look them up. It will blow you away. I opened this thing and I was just completely blown away by it. I mean, it came with a book with everything you need to know about axes, from how they make them to how you use them, the different types, different techniques. I mean, it was unbelievable. So if you don't own one of these, I highly recommend it if you have the means. They're a fantastic tool. But knowing me, I've got to know the whys of this. I wanted to know, how does this thing work as well as it does? Why do they set it up the way that they do? And can I incorporate some of those techniques into some of the other items that I have, some of the other axes and hatchets, to make them work as well as possible? Turns out you can. So that's what we're going to focus on. This is not just an axe sharpening video. This is going to be a full setup. This is how you can take one of your axes and set it up kind of the way that I do, which is kind of the way Grand Force Brooks does and some of the other high-end, to set them up to really perform well. So I'm going to show you how we do that. So in this video, we're going to go through our plan and our goal. What are we trying to accomplish? What's the point of what we're trying to do? What's the process that we're going to use? What are some of the tools that we're going to use? And then at the very end, we're going to go through maintenance, which is extremely, extremely important. I'm going to have a whole nother video at another time going just through maintenance, not only on axes, but also different items, different blades, because I don't think people, especially in the Western world, spend enough time focusing on the maintenance of their blades. They just don't take care of them well, and that's part of the problem. If you will go through this process and you focus on regular maintenance moving forward, you won't have to do a whole lot of that over the course of the blade. So let's start talking a little bit about the process and what we're going to go through in terms of we're going to go through and talk about the plan and the goal first. What are we trying to accomplish? Where are we at? And where do we want to be? So let's stay tuned and we'll go on to the next step. Alright, so what's our plan? Well, we've got a small hatchet, store-bought hatchet. This is just a store brand hatchet. And it's been a good one. It's a good tool, but I want to set it up to work even better. I'm not going to make it as high quality as the Grand Force Brook because I can't do anything about the materials and I can't do anything about the heat treating. So what can I do to set this up from a sharpening and setup level to get it to where it'll perform? So one of the things that you'll notice from a Grand Force Brooks when you get one is they are extremely polished, mirror polished at the edge and back about a 1/2 inch to 3/8 of an inch, depending on the size of the hatchet or the axe that you're using. They've got a good convex edge, which is what we want. The axe or the hatchet we're going to be using is a little bit too thin, and it's a little bit too much of a wedge. It doesn't have enough convex in it for me. It tends to stick into things too much, and I don't like that. So we're going to get rid of this, and we're going to build this on this particular axe. So that's going to be the first step of what we're going to do, is to make this more of a convex wedge. Every blade, no matter what kind of blade it is a wedge of some form. Depending on the use of that particular tool, that blade, determines what kind of edge, what kind of wedge you build, and how thin it will be depending on the usage. It will also depend on, when you're done, what type of micro serrations do you want on that blade. If it's a slicing item, you want some micro serrations, and we'll talk about that more in depth in other videos, but for the purposes of an axe, I don't want any micro serrations, if possible, on my axe on the actual cutting surface. There will be no no secondary bevel. This is just going to be one convex bevel all the way out to the end. This portion, the very cutting portion, is going to be polished all the way down to a 10,000 grit stone and then stropped with a leather strop stick. About the behind that, the 1/2 inch to 3/8 inch is going to be polished all the way down to about an 800 grit sandpaper. That's all I found that's necessary. I don't like to go any farther than that, mainly just because it's a pain to keep up with and it's just an extra step. But you can take it as high as you want. I've found 800 grit sandpaper, 1200 at max. It gives a really good finish on it and will make it just really easy to get in and out of things, make it very easy to clean, which we're going to be doing as well in the maintenance portion. So anyway, this is what we're trying to get to. We're trying to get rid of this really steep edge and get more of a convex edge on there. So that's the first thing that we're going to do, is get to that point. Alright, so this is going to be our process for this full setup. This is the first part. Our next step after we make a plan is going to be to establish the actual wedge and the geometry that we have. And we're going to do that primarily with the file. Then we're going to need to clean that up, and we're going to go on to refining the wedge, and we're going to start out with a 120 and 320 grit sandpaper. This is just designed to get rid of some of the humps and flat spots to get a true rounded convex edge, convex wedge that will be really good for the purposes of an axe or a hatchet. The next step is we're going to establish the edge, and we're going to do that with 1,000 grit whetstone using circular motions. And what we're doing at that point is we're actually trying to focus on the actual cutting point, the point area. Maybe 1/8 of an inch back is where we're really focusing on. We want to make sure that it's sharp. We're not going to worry about a razor edge. It's pointless to put a razor edge on an axe or any type of hard target tool. Doesn't make any sense to do it. You just want it to be, sharp. You want it to have some bite. I'll show you a little trick that I use to figure that out. And you just want it to be polished. So the first step to establishing the edge is 1,000 grit whetstone. Alright, then what we're going to do is we're going to move on to, once we've established the edge, we're going to go back and we're going to refine the edge some more. We're going to go back to a 320, 500 grit sandpaper. Then we're going to go back to refining the edge some more. This is where we're actually starting the process of polishing out the edge to where we want it. The 1,000 grit whetstone took the burr off. Now we're refining it now. So we're going to go to a 3,000 grit, 6,000 grit, and 10,000 grit whetstones. That's really going to put a mirror finish, almost mirror finish on our edge, the actual cutting surface. And then we're going to go back. Next step will be final wedge finish, which we're going to put on with an 800 grit. It's going to be sort of a cross between a matte finish, satin finish, and a mirror finish. So it's kind of in between the two. You can take it even farther if you like. I usually stop at 800 grit. So that's the next couple steps in the process. Now let's move on to the final portion. Alright, so the last couple steps of this process is we've put the final finish on the wedge. We've polished our edge all the way to a 10,000 grit. So now what we're going to do is we're going to strop the edge a little bit with a leather strop stick. Want to make sure, as another reminder, make sure you use some type of oil, WD-40, cutting fluid, or something. You don't want to use direct leather when you're stropping an edge because it builds up too much heat and it can mess up your temper. It's not as critical with an axe because the edge itself is so thick. Whereas with a knife, it can really be problematic. So you want to make sure you use a fluid. The last thing we're going to do is we're going to apply a wax paste finish. And I'll show you what we use in the next section. This is an extra step that I highly recommend it. Not only for the preservation of your tool, you're going to see how messed up and corroded these, how rusty this axe that we're working on is. Could have been prevented had I been using a wax paste, and I do this for a couple reasons. Number one, it will protect it, but it'll protect the metal of your axe, but it also puts a really smooth finish on it, like waxing your car. It will go in and out of wooden objects much faster. It won't get stuck in the stumps. It won't get stuck in the limbs. It's a really cool step to do. So I highly recommend you do this. Use the wax paste. So that's the full process. So let's start looking at some tools that we're going to need for all this. All right, some tools of the trade here. We're going to need as good a sharp as high quality mill file as you can find, preferably one that cuts in one direction. You don't really want to use the ones that I think they're called bastard files, where they cross. You don't really use that because that's going to score your surface too much. Obviously, you're going to need a file card as you go along to keep this thing clean. I've got just some kind of a hard backing. Anything will do. This is a piece of aluminum that I ground to wrap my sandpaper around when I'm applying finish. When you go into your higher grits, it's going to be helpful if you've got some sort of a harder rubber backing to kind of help cushion a little bit. It'll help to put a better finish on there. I've got a 1,000 grit whetstone. I'll show you in the video why I use a smaller piece. I've got a 3,000 grit whetstone, 6,000 grit, and a 10,000 grit. We're also going to be using some sandpaper. The sandpaper that I recommend, it's the only sandpaper that I use for all of my knife making projects, is a Rhino Wet Rhino Wet sandpaper from Redline. I think you can get it from TrueGrit.com. Fantastic product. I know several master bladesmiths. This is the only stuff that they use. We're also going to be using a leather strop stick. Basically, it's just a piece of wood with a piece of leather epoxy to it. It's got some rubbing compound worked into there, but any kind of oil and stuff will do. We've got a degreaser that we're going to use in our maintenance step. Some type of cutting fluid. I prefer to use machine quality cutting fluid just because it works better. And then we're also going to use some Minwax paste finishing wax. You'll notice I recommend the Minwax and the Rhino Wet because I don't see there's not really any comparison out there. You can use any degreaser, any kind of cutting fluid or lubricant that you want to use, including WD-40. But these, I don't know that you can really do without those or can really replace them much. So that's the ones that I use. The last thing that's in here is a little bit of Scotch-Brite. It doesn't matter what color you have, coarser the better. This is the red color, which is sort of a medium grit, and I just use this to clean up my stones to get some of the metal fragments off as we're going. So this is all the tools that we're going to use for this process. Alright, so this is the little hatchet that we're going to be working on today. It's just a little single hand hatchet. It's a big box store job. If you can see, this thing has not been well taken care of, I'll admit. It spent most of its life in the toolbox of a four-wheeler, so it has not been very well taken care of, but it has been a good little hatchet. And what we're going to be doing is, I'm not really going to spend a lot of time worrying about this rust and corrosion back here. I'm mostly focused on about this, roughly 3/8 to a 1/2 inch right back here along my cutting edge. That's where we're going to be focused on, like I showed you in the process video, where we're going to be focused on. And what I'm trying to do, just to show you kind of where we're headed, is to get it closer to this Grand's Force Brooks. Now this is my baby right here, so if you can see that, try to get it in view. There we go. See that 1/2 inch right there where it's almost a mirror finish? That's where we're going to kind of get this to. It does not have to be exactly a mirror finish. In fact, that might be kind of overkill, but it is going to be highly polished. So we're going to pretty much eliminate friction on this thing, and when we get to the end, we're going to do a little bit. Remember, this is a full setup. We're taking a hatchet or an axe head that is not set up properly. It's not how we want it. It needs a lot of work. That's what the majority of this video is. But at the end, we'll go through a little bit of a highlighting the regular maintenance that I do on this axe that you can use as the same process that you would use on any of your other ones. Alright, so we'll get started on this. I've already done a little bit to it, and I'm working from the back to the front. I'm not trying to take too much back off of this area here. I don't want to go any deeper. I'm trying to make this a little bit more convex. Remember, these bastard files, these mill files, they go basically cut in one direction. Don't forget about your cutting fluid. This stuff makes a huge difference. Yeah, it's making pretty quick work of this. Going really quickly. Get a rag real quick. Get some of this off. apply a little bit more cutting fluid, and I'm going to get my file card and just clean up this a little bit. It does not take long. It doesn't take long to fill these up. There we go. You can already tell a big difference. You know when it's starting to get loaded up, when you're just kind of gliding across it and you're not really doing much cutting. You can feel it as much as you can hear it. Got a lot of corrosion back here on this back corner. I guess it would be the top corner. Edge is good. Alright, I think that's going to basically do it for this one. Check my edge. Yeah, it's looking really good there. So I'm pretty happy with what I got. That's much better. I had already done the other side, so you can see this is kind of where we're going with this. This is just the 120 grit. So what I do with the 120 grit is when you're making these files, when you're cutting with these files, you're going to get little flat spots in here, little humps and little ridges and things like that. You can keep going with your file and work those out. I found it a lot easier just to get some 120 grit sandpaper and work that down. So I'll show you how I do that here in just a second. Alright, so now I've got my 120 grit sandpaper and I've got it on my little sanding bar, and I'm going to again kind of work just back and forth along the edge. I'm not going towards the edge, I'm just going back and forth. I guess that would be just parallel to the edge, and I'm just working on trying to smooth out that finish, trying to get those file marks out of it. And I'm using the cutting fluid again. It really works well on this paper. Alright, so for our next step here, we're going to go to our first grit of stone. This is a 1000 grit King. I think King is the brand. It doesn't really matter the brand. I just like these King Japanese whetstones. And this is 1000 grit. And if you notice, it's a really short piece. Well, they make for sharpening axes and hatchets, they make these round sharpening pucks, which work really well. The reason that they do that is most of the time when you're sharpening a blade, you've got your stone and then you're moving the blade around the stone. But with axes, the way that they're shaped and things like that, it's usually easier to move the stone around the axe itself, around the blade, rather than the other way around. I'm going to be doing a little bit of both in this process, but I've broken off about a half a piece of this just so I have easier to use, and we're just going to be kind of using a circular motion like this, not back and forth. It's just a circular motion, and again what I'm doing is I'm refining my edge, but I'm also cleaning up this surface, getting some of these scratches out of that. You can't see it in camera view, but I've got a little bucket of water underneath this so I don't make a mess, and that I also have some water on hand to just kind of keep wetting this as I go and cleaning up my stone. If this stone loads up, what I do is I've got a piece of Scotch-Brite here. This is just a red one that I have, but you can use any Scotch-Brite pad just to kind of clean this up and wet it down and keep going. So let me zoom in a little bit on this and we'll get started. You can use two hands if you want, which I think I will. You can see that stone starting to load up on there. And I'm just kind of working down it. Don't stay in one spot too long. It Again, we're not putting a true mirror finish on this. It's complete. I don't like doing that. I just want a good polished, clean edge and clean cutting surface through this portion. Looking good. Alright, so we got this done. We've got 1,000 grit stone on both sides, and it's right where we want it. It's nice and clean, nice and smooth, and it's basically already taken the majority of the burr that had formed with the filing. Majority of that is gone. We're going to take care of that in just a little bit when we go back to the stones. But for right now, the next step is we're going to go ahead and start to refine this a little bit. We're going to move on to our 300 grit, our 320 grit sandpaper, and then our 500 grit sandpaper. So we're going to do that. And again, what we're doing is we're just kind of trying to clean this up a little bit, get it a little bit more polished, and then we're going to move on to the next step, which is the next set of stones. Alright, so I've got a strip cut of my 320 grit and my 500 grit. That's all we're going to need for this step. And this is the part where we're going to use this rubber block as sort of a backing on here. And it works basically kind of the same way. I'm just going to wrap a little bit of the paper on here, and using the 320 grit, wrap it around using the aluminum block. I'm just going to kind of go back here, and this cushion that it's going to provide me with this rubber piece is going to kind of allow it to curve around a little bit and sort of smooth this out and make a more, since we're working on a convex edge, a convex shape, it's going to kind of round a little bit with it and kind of get into all those contours. So again, we're going to go to our little bit of our cutting fluid and zoom back in a little bit and get to work. We're not doing anything here other than just cleaning up this surface. It will help with the burr a little bit. The edge is already where we want it. We don't need any more of an edge on this. We're going to work on it on the stones just a little bit. Because remember, when you're doing with an axe or a hatchet like we talked about, having too fine of an edge actually works against you. When it comes to a hard target or a hard object cutting tool, you don't want too fine of an edge because it's not going to last. Again, like I stated, we're not putting a secondary bevel on this. It's only going to be a primary bevel. So all we're going to be doing is just making sure that this thing is nice and clean with no chips, and we're going to have a good convex edge. Man, that is looking really, really good. Now with the glare on here, it's a little difficult to see, but man, that is really slick. So now I can use just this one piece on the other side. Now I'm going to switch over to the 500 grit. A little bit of cutting fluid on there. Same process. The finer you get, you're going to have to move on to a fresher piece pretty soon because this stuff will load up pretty quick. But this Rhino Wet is just fantastic, fantastic product. I don't know what they make the paper out of, but it is very durable. It doesn't break down, and it does resist loading up pretty well. So it is really, really good stuff. I really, really, really like it. I'm gonna make, it's already in really good shape, but I'm gonna make one more pass. Probably not even going to use cutting fluid on this one just because I want to be able to see where I'm at. Cutting fluid, again, is good for your to cut down on the heat, because the more heat you build up, the more you can end up damaging the temper of your edge. That's one of the main reasons that you want to use cutting fluid, but this is really starting to clean up. Really, really good. That's it. That's just as good as you can get it for a 500 grit. I mean, this is a very usable axe as it is. You could stop right here if you wanted to, and you're going to get all the same things out of it. But man, I just really like to do it nice. especially that way I know that I'm not going to have to do this very often. So, all right, so I'm going to switch it over to the other side and we'll come back for the next step. All right, so now what we're going to do is we're going to switch gears a little bit. Now we're going to work a little bit more on the edge. So even though we're not going to be putting what I would consider we're not putting a secondary bevel on this edge, it's going to be smooth out. I want the edge itself to be as polished as possible. It's not necessarily going to be fine because we've got a true convex edge, but I want this thing to be fine. I don't want to have any burrs on it. So what I've got is a little setup here, and I've got my 3000 grit, is it 3000? Yeah, 3000 grit Kingstone here, and I'm just going to be working on the edge. I'm not working on the whole thing that we just did, just maybe, I don't know, maybe 1/8 of an inch up. We're going to refine that and clean that up a little bit with some finer grit sandpaper, but right now I'm just kind of working on my edge. I'd love to use one of those sharpening pucks that they make. The issue is that you can't really find them in the grits that I like to use, so you end up having to kind of, you know, do it a little bit like this. All right, so now we've got our 6000 grit on here, and we're going to follow the same process. I'm not doing anything differently. So all right, so we're getting close to the end here. I actually happen to have a small piece of the 10,000 grit, so that's why I've switched back over here to this vise, because I just prefer to do it like that a little bit better. So we are almost done. This is not going to take a lot of time. Again, we're not moving metal at all here. We're just working on polishing this edge area, like maybe even, you know, not even 1/8 of an inch behind the cutting surface, the actual edge. So this is not going to take long to do. I'm just making circular passes. Alright, that looks really good. It does not take long. It does not take long at all, because at this point you've already removed a lot of the metal, so you're pretty much done at this point. You're just refining things. So I'm going to flip this over, do the other side, and I'll be back with you with the next step. Alright, so we're almost to the end here, and we've got our 800 grit sandpaper, a little bit of cutting fluid, and we're putting a good polished finish on this. I'm probably going to go ahead and stop at 800 grit, but you can take this just as far as you want to take it, depending on how polished you want. I will say, the higher the polish that you put on it, the more rust resistant, the more corrosion resistant it will be. But I've got a technique I'm going to show you that'll help you with that once we get to the end. So I'm just working back and forth across the grain. A little bit more cutting fluid. Alright, this is our last step. We've got our strop stick here. It's got a handle on it. We're going to just go over it, and we're going to kind of polish up that edge and sort of strop it. Got a little bit of cutting fluid on it, because you know, leather, regardless of, you may not realize this, but leather on a cutting edge, although it's good for stropping, it can generate a lot of heat. And it's not a huge deal with the kind of edge that we have on this, because the edge is pretty thick. It's not a you know, a real thin secondary bevel. It's pretty durable, so we don't really have to worry about too much as far as that goes. We're not going to really mess it up. But just for your knives and stuff, you always want to use cutting fluid, especially when you strop, or some kind of oil to cut down on the heat at your edge, because you don't want to ruin your edge with just the sharpening process. Alright, the stones that we did, and then with the stropping that we're doing, you want to double check to make sure you don't have a burr on there. I checked before I used my strop. The strop can help you with that, but just pay attention. If you've still got some burr on there, before you strop, you want to go through the process of removing that. You can use that, any kind of ceramic stone or anything like that will help you. Even just running it through the edge of a piece of wood will help. So let me flip this over real quick, and we'll strop the other side, and we'll be done with this job. There's a lot of different uses for this, and one of them is it's sort of an underground thing that a lot of tool users will do, even machinists, that they'll put this paste wax on a lot of their tools so that it helps prevent corrosion. It's crazy how good this works. I use it on my axes, I use it on my hatchets, I even use it on my milling machine. I used to have my milling machine, I used to have to keep it coated with a motor oil just to keep it from rusting. You do a couple coats of the Minwax, this finishing wax, and you don't have to worry about that at all. It takes care of it. And all we're going to do is just really simple the way this is applied. You just get a rag and just put a pretty liberal coat on there. You can do it all over the surface. I even use this on my handle. So we're going to use this stuff again whenever we do the my Grand Force axe. So you're going to see me go through this process. Just putting a good coat on here. This will help cut down on rust. And the other thing it does is it cuts down on your on the friction. So this is going to basically be just like waxing your vehicle. It's going to have a nice smooth surface, and you will notice a big difference whenever you go to whenever you're limbing or you're felling trees or you're using your axe. You're going to notice how smooth it goes in and out of the wood. The combination of the type of polish that we did at the edge, the way that we refined this cutting surface along the head, the convex shape, and then this finishing paste, it just makes a world of difference in how this thing's going to perform. So we've got a coat on there. We're going to need to let this dry for about a half hour, and then once it's good and dried, just like with your car, you'll come back with another rag and you'll take this off. So that's basically it. That's the last step of this axe. And I hope you give it a try. I know it's a little bit of work to get started, but man, you talk about a good working tool when you do it like this. Everything works together, and it's just awesome. This is the way I set up all my hatchets, all my axes. This is the way I do it. So I hope you enjoyed this video. Stay tuned. Be back in a second, and we're going to do I'll show you on my other axe how we actually do just the maintenance. Thank you.